I'm good. How about yourself?
Not bad.
Good.
Hi.
Say who you are, how old you are, and what you do for a living.
You want me to identify myself? Put myself into a category immediately.
What is the most important part of your identity?
My identity as an American.
Being an American.
Being a young woman who's a free thinker.
Judaism is pretty deeply ingrained in me.
I think my empathy.
What were the questions? Did everybody do this?
What is the most important part of your identity?
Human being, I think. Not really think, I know.
Obviously, we had this incredible weekend last week. Can I just celebrate a few things? I want to thank you for inviting, because we had over 2,100, almost 2,200 people come to our Easter services last weekend, and so many of them were first-time guests. Yes, you can clap for that. Had someone say to me this week, like, Greg, we're going to need to increase the budget for those $5 gift cards we send to all the newcomers when you do that, because we gave away hundreds and hundreds of dollars of those last weekend. We had a couple dozen people say, I'd be interested in that starting point thing that you're doing, which is for people who are trying to sort out faith. And I love being part of someone's journey at that stage. Of course, we've had all these baptisms. There were 38 baptisms over the last 2 weekends and another 10 happening this weekend. It's just incredible to see what God is doing. And I really do want to thank you for your generosity, because your financial generosity, it lives in the background a lot of times, but it makes all of this possible in so many ways. And I very much appreciate it. And even the decision for our church this weekend to say, hey, let's take this weekend's offering and invest it all back in those compassion efforts that we do. That decision is a lot easier because of how generous you've been already. And to think that this weekend, if 100% of us participate, even in a small amount, in giving toward those compassion efforts, it'll change the landscape of people in need in Northwest Indiana. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And then I got to tell you, on Monday night, this past week, I got to speak at our student ministry. That's 2 weeks in a row for me there. And there are incredible things happening with our middle school students and our high school students. Just a shout out all around our church. Things are really beautiful right now. So we're going to start this new series this weekend called My Identity, and we're going to look at this for the next 4 weeks. And I mean, if you're paying attention at all, you've seen that at least the word or concept of identity has emerged in very significant ways over the last, I'd say, 10 years in our culture. It was just a few years ago when the New York Times did an article and said, this is the year of identity, of people figuring out their identity, of sorting out what that means. We use this terminology in all kinds of different ways where we talk about our personal identity, we talk about group identities, we talk about how we identify. I identify as this, I identify as that. It's just all over the place. But one of the things that's interesting to me as I talk with people personally is I feel like there's a little bit of an identity crisis. A sense where people are sorting out and they know it's probably important these days and you should be able to define who you are. And yet people have a little trouble sometimes saying, this is at the core of who I am. And, a lot of you were with us at the start of the year and I did this series on mental health. And I shared all these statistics about what is truly a mental health crisis in our country, and in particular, a mental health crisis for people who are in their teens and their 20s. And the more I talk to people and the more I sort this out, what's obvious to me is that many times our identity crisis becomes a mental health crisis because people are having trouble figuring out, who am I? What am I supposed to do? What do I represent? And living in that in a way that's consistent and gracious. So I'm looking forward to talking about it. Let me give you just a little bit of a context for, I think, why things are so confusing for people's identities these days. For centuries now, there's really two different cultural ways that people are encouraged to seek out their identity. And I think in our world, in the Western world, American world today, what's happening is these two are kind of wrestling with each other and leaving a few things out. So think about this. In traditional cultures, and by traditional, you might think of American culture from a few generations ago or Western culture from a few generations ago. When I go to places like Africa and Asia and see cultures that have not moved forward in the same ways, for good or for bad, as American culture. Those tend to be traditional cultures. In traditional cultures, the very idea that gets celebrated, how you become a hero in a traditional culture, is the idea that you would subjugate your individual self for the good of a group, for the good of a cause, for the good of a family, for the good of a country. In our traditional time, we would refer to that generation even as the greatest generation. And the whole idea is that there wasn't one hero. It wasn't a breakout person who expressed themselves. It was that people looked at the whole and said, I will sacrifice for the cause. And consistently in traditional cultures, whether that's sacrificing for your family or sacrificing for a country, that's what brought people identity. But in non-traditional cultures, which Western countries have certainly become, although it varies from family to family and community to community, in non-traditional cultures, you become a hero actually by breaking out of the community that you're a part of. By looking inside yourself, following your own hopes and your own dreams, breaking out, not being limited by that, accomplishing something great, and that's where the hero comes from. And I think many of us think, well, maybe it's this, or maybe it's that, or maybe it's neither, but we're confused, like, what should I even be aiming at with my life? What's the right story? And I got to tell you, you might be sitting there thinking, clearly, Greg, traditional is the right answer. Or clearly, Greg, non-traditional is the right answer. And I'm telling you, it's not that clear. There are strengths and weaknesses to both of those approaches. And we're going to get to discover that by simply asking this question: what is my identity? Now, I do this from time to time, so let me kind of show you how these next 4 weeks are going to go. I basically have 2 hours of content to present to you. And I need you to be here for all 4, or at least get online if you have to miss one, because they all kind of fit together in an order. And I think it works beautifully because I have about 30 minutes this weekend, and 30, and 30, and 30. And in between the 3 weekends, not after the last one, but just in between the 3, it kind of lays itself out perfectly to give you something to think about for that week going into the next week. So we're going to start this weekend just with the idea of discovery. And this might feel a little bit like a workshop to you. It might feel even a little bit scattered tonight as I introduce lots of different concepts and have you think about things from lots of different ways. But the whole idea is I'm just laying out a bunch of things to start your thinking about your identity. In week 2, next week, I'm going to talk about prioritizing or sorting the different identities that you have. Because you have more than one thing that fits into your identity. And one of the healthiest things you can do is say, well, when I have more than one thing, which one is the highest priority and which ones come after that? So this is what's kind of interesting to me about week 2 and then week 3. I'm going to ask you to sort them out next week and put them in a priority order, the elements of identity you have. And then week 3, I'm going to ask you to pressure test it. The question for week 3 is, okay, you told me what your priorities are. Are they your priorities really? I mean, when the rubber meets the road, when you're in a difficult situation, when you're in a bind, do you still live by those? It's essentially a pressure test. And some of you have heard me tell a story. It's one of my favorite stories to tell because it had an impact on my life when I was a teenager. I had an experience as a teenager. I was playing sports. I was in high school. And I came across a guy who was playing football, not for my high school, on another team. And he was telling the story about how, he was a really good football player and he was getting lots of, chances of success and these sorts of things. And being a football player was very important to him. He wanted to be a good teammate. He wanted to work out. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to excel in everything that he did. And then his coach came to him, and I won't go into the details of this, but his coach essentially asked him to compromise something in his Christian values in order to keep participating and progressing on the team. And that gave this guy a real dilemma because he felt like Christianity was central to who he was, but he also felt like being a football player and what he had been able to accomplish and what was in front of him and what he wanted to do was important to him too. And he really wrestled through this until he went back and told the coach, no, I won't do it. And this was his phrase. He says, Coach, I am not a football player who happens to be a Christian. I am a Christian who happens to be a football player. So when I suggest to you that we'll sort these out and then we'll pressure test them, That's the idea of weeks 2 and 3. And then I can't wait for you to experience week 4. Because if you've been able to come to a conclusion about what your identity is, and you get some clarity about that, and you feel confident about it, then week 4 is just a chance to go and live it out. And it doesn't mean that life will be easy. Of course it doesn't. But it does mean that you walk with some confidence. And you can let your yes be yes and your no be no. And when Jesus describes that the life following him is a life where your burden is light, I think what he's saying is when you're clear about your identity, it's not that there won't be burdens in life, but it is that you know who you are. And you're able to walk through life with a confidence. And it's easier to make decisions. And you walk through what you're going to walk through. And I hope to release you at the end of 4 weeks to do that. So the question of identity has been around as long as time. It shows up in the scriptures all over the place. Let me just show you a couple of them to start. In the book of Exodus, Moses said to God, "Who am I? Who am I?" This is the question of identity. Who am I? Some of you have literally stood in front of the mirror and you've looked at yourself and you're like, who am I? What makes me who I am? Now, this is not a question that's usually on the tip of our tongues all the time in life. Usually what happens is there's an occasion that happens and it drives us to this question. You might be at a place in life where you need to make a major decision. And when you're about to make this major decision, you have to ask the question, well, who am I? You might be in a place in your life where you are faced with a crisis. You're in a situation you didn't dream of. You hate that you're there. Maybe your marriage is in crisis and you're trying to decide what you're going to do with it. And as you're sorting out, what am I going to do in the midst of this crisis? You might ask the question, well, who am I? What are my highest priorities? What makes me who I am? What do I value? I want to live out of that. We see teenagers have to ask this question. I mean, teenagers are probably forming their identity more than anyone else, and yet they're faced with the pressures of making what feel like lifelong decisions, even in their teenage years. Sometimes you'll ask this question when you're overwhelmed. Actually, when Moses asked this question to God, it wasn't out of the blue, and the tone wasn't really, God, who am I? What was happening in this situation is God had asked Moses to do something that Moses didn't feel like he could do. Moses, I'm going to call on you to lead the people out of Israel, to speak to Pharaoh, to do these sorts of things. And this is actually what Moses said. He said, who am I to do those sorts of things? And God had an answer for him. But it's a really great question. Who am I? Do you know who you are? Jesus actually flipped this question in a little different way and made it a conversation among his friends. He was in a setting once, and this is what he said. He said, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? And there's always a social aspect to figuring out our identity. Now, it doesn't mean that no matter what someone says, their answer is right, and that's who you are. But if you went to a group of people that you trust and you say, well, who do you say that I am? I think their answers would be enlightening for you, even if they're incorrect. Because if they're people you can trust, they would help you see how others see you. What vibe are you putting off? What are you projecting? What do they see in the decisions that you're making? Who do you say that I am? And actually, when Jesus asked this question, lots of guys got the answer wrong. And Jesus was confident enough in who he was to say, no, not that. That's not who I am. That's not who I am. And then Peter got it right. And Jesus said, yeah, that's who I am. And if you ever wonder, in his humanity, how could Jesus go through the things he went through? Call on God to do the things he expected God to do. Be patient when he needed to be patient. Go to the cross even when he didn't want to go to the cross. How would Jesus do that? And the answer is, Jesus knew who he was. So, with this in mind, let me give you a little bit of a working definition of identity. Identity, for our purposes here, is just going to be this. It's my sense of self and my source of worth. My sense of self, that idea that I can actually see myself and I can define in myself who I am. I understand when I'm consistent with it. I understand when I'm inconsistent with it. I know there's things I like about who I am and things I don't like about who I am. I have a sense of myself. And this also gets at the source of my value or my worth or my purpose. Like, why am I here? Am I valuable at all? And if I am, how would I know that? Where does that come from? What assigns me value in this world? So just to break this down a little bit more, self is asking the question, what is my durable core? My durable core. And I think what you're going to discover over the next few weeks is that you have multiple things that are at your durable core, and you have lots of things that kind of move in and out of your life. Now, when I say durable core, here's what I mean. You'll start to notice who you really are when you say, no matter what situation I'm in, this remains true. Were any of you like chameleons in high school? You were like the person who could hang out with the jocks and hang out with the nerds and hang out with the band kids and hang out with the whatever. And like just whatever group you were in, you kind of fit into those groups. And I think, oh, there's something really beautiful about that. You're probably an unselfish person who relates to people on their basis rather than your own basis. That's a good thing. But sometimes there's a little bit about it that's like, oh, I just change. Depending on which circumstance I'm in. I can change myself, no problem. With the jocks, I can act like a jock. With the nerds, I can act like a nerd. And I would say, well, if that's what you do, then that's not your durable core. You don't act the same way in every situation. If you ask yourself, what's core to who I am, whether I'm happy or whether I'm sad, whether I'm winning or whether I'm losing, whether I'm lonely or whether I feel good about my community, what's my durable core? That's your sense of self. And then your worth, of course, is where does my value and my purpose come from? I don't know if you're familiar. I know this is kind of an older movie, the movie Chariots of Fire. In that movie, there are two runners that ultimately that are competing against each other. One of them is Eric Liddell, and he speaks about his running as a spiritual experience. He talks about running for the glory of God, and that when he runs, that's when he feels the pleasure of God. It's a beautiful thing. And I don't know if you remember this from the story, but Harold Abrams is the competitor. And when he's about ready to step to the line for a 100-yard dash, this is what he says. I have the next 10 seconds to justify my existence. What he's saying is, this is who I am. If I win, I justify it. If I'm fast, I justify it. But if I lose, or if I'm slow, or if I stumble, then I have lost my value. I have lost my worth. Now, for none of us, I'm sure, none of us in this room, do we stand at the start of a 100-yard dash and say the next 10 seconds justifies my existence. But that doesn't mean you don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what? I'm going to work 80 hours this week to justify my existence. I got to make $100,000 this year to justify my existence. Of course, you wouldn't maybe say it that way. You might say to provide for my kids, to live in the house I want to live in, to do those sorts of things. But this is what starts to cycle in our brain. I have to take the next rung on the ladder. I have to achieve the next title at work. I need to, whatever it is, whatever you're chasing, that's where you find your values. Like that's what justifies your existence. And when you think about your identity, it is your sense of self, but it is also what helps you feel worth and value. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of gauges before we even dive into identity markers themselves to think about how you think about your identity. Okay, so let's start with this one, the first gauge. Some of you in the room, when you gauge yourself and you think about yourself, you would end up on this edge of a spectrum, and you would have feelings of inadequacy. Others of you in this room, when you think about yourself, you're going to end up on this edge of the spectrum because you're arrogant, right? Pride is sometimes what we would call it. Now, this is very, very important because if you're arrogant or if you feel inadequate, you actually will have a very difficult time getting a clear sense of yourself. One of the things the scriptures warn for arrogant people is to say, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. If you were honest with yourself and say, in most circumstances, I kind of need the conversation to revolve around me. I need the decisions that get made to revolve around me. I need it to work out for me. Then there's an arrogance in that. And I want to encourage you as you take this journey to say, oh, you're going to have to back off that arrogance and embrace some humility in order to truly find yourself. And I want to suggest to you that the problem is just as large, maybe larger, if you're the kind of person who is always down on yourself. Someone asks you to do something, you say, I can never do that. Someone gives you a compliment, and you say, oh, it's not just false humility. It's like real dysfunctional inadequacy that says, no, that's not true about me. And one of the challenges, of course, with having too low of a view of yourself, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, is that God created you. That you are his workmanship. That he gave you certain gifts and abilities and personality that he wants for you to use and flourish in. And for some reason, you're sitting over in the corner saying, no, it's actually diminishing God more than diminishing you. And so one of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis gets at the center of this. It says, humility is not thinking less of yourself. That's not what humility is. Humility is thinking of yourself less. Not putting yourself at the center of everything. And the biblical word for this is meekness. Now, I know people misunderstand the word meekness. They think it's weakness. It's not. The whole idea behind meekness is it's a stallion. It has strength, but it's bridled. It's under control. And so you walk with this quiet confidence. And I got to tell you, I'm just going to tell you this personally. When I hang out in the commons area and I meet people new or I talk to someone for the second, third, fourth, 100th time, one of the most natural grids for me is like, is this person full of themselves? And therefore, my job as your pastor is to knock you down. Or is this person down on themselves? And my job as your pastor is to build you up. Or is this person healthy? Now, right now, some of you are thinking, did I talk with Greg in the commons area last night? I wonder what he thought of me. But if you're wondering what I thought of you, it's probably because you think of yourself too much. So this is one of the gauges. If we're going to have a conversation about identity, man, having a healthy view of yourself, very important. Here's the other gauge. Some people hide things. Some people present themselves authentically. And some people focus on the presentation of themselves. And some of us actually do all three. Actually, all of us to some degree do all three. Let me just give you 3 quick grids on this as you think about yourself. Think about your body and your image of your body and how you feel about your body. Your physical self. Are you comfortable with who you are? Would you like to hide who you are? Do you spend half your day and half your budget helping yourself look better than you actually are? Being able to step in to say, you know, this is who I am. It's authentic. It's a very healthy thing. It's not just your body. Think about when you have an accomplishment. Something that you did, something that made a difference in the world, something that was good for your family. Do you have to make sure you highlight that so that everybody knows you're out there presenting it? Do you diminish it or hide it in some false humility all over again? Or do you just say, yeah, look, glory to God, look what he did through me? Third category. How about your vices? The things you do wrong. The things you're tempted to do, and sometimes you beat the temptation, and sometimes you don't. If you hide your vices and you try to conceal them and act as though they aren't there, it becomes very difficult. I mean, I've been talking to people about the problems in their life for 25 years. I know people hide their vices. I know people are hiding financial things. I know they're hiding porn addictions. I know they're hiding gambling addictions. I know they're hiding booze in their house. They're hiding. And one of the reasons I want to do a My Identity series is to invite you to a life where you don't have to hide anymore. It won't be easy, of course, but it's way better, way better. So, how do we find our identity? Well, there's kind of a common journey that most people go through and kind of sort out and gauge who they are. The first thing we tend to do is we look around and we'll take the perception of other people and we'll take their perception of us as an indicator of who we are. Now, I could go through a long list of things that happens in this situation. Sometimes it's a cultural pull and you don't even feel it because the whole culture is going one direction and it is pulling you to be just like everyone else. These days within our culture, a lot of times there's a group pull within a culture. It might be politics. It might be a sexual identity. It might be any number of things, but you get together with a group of like-minded people and then there's kind of a magnet that starts to think, oh, I start to see the world entirely through that lens. Talk about a pressure test and prioritizing. One of the things that's happened, interestingly, in churches over the last few years as things have become so politically divisive is that there's a lot of sad pastors out there, including myself in a few circumstances, where I'm trying to lead people to put faith first and politics second, because I think that's the right order for how we live our life, to let our politics be shaped by our faith. And you run into people who are like, they just can't do it. It's their politics first, and then they figure out a way in the Bible to justify their politics. Yeah. It's not just cultural forces, though. A lot of times when we look around, we're playing a little bit of a comparison game. Social media is a little too easy of a target, actually, because I don't think it's just social media. But it's a good example where we see the life other people are living. Actually, what we see is the highlight reel of other people's lives. We compare it to our regular life, and then we feel less than. And something in our identity gets negatively affected by the idea that we think other people all have it better than us. Or on the flip side, we think we're better than others because we're able to present something better than them. But without a doubt, the most prominent place where your identity gets shaped by other people is that you probably have 5 or 6 people in your life, and their voice really matters to you. It weighs more than everyone else's voice. Now, I'm not saying that this is a negative thing at all. Sometimes God uses those very people in your life to say, listen, I see in you something you couldn't see in yourself that is true about you, and they draw it out of you. And thank God for that you are shaped by other people's understanding of who you are. They can see something you couldn't see. But I also know people who carry many scars, and the voice of their dad, or the voice of their coach, or the voice of their pastor said something to them about how they were a failure, they were a loser, they didn't measure up, they didn't live up to it. And that voice has shaped someone's identity. And I just think we should all be aware that our identities are shaped by the people and voices around us. And many times that's where people go on a journey. The second place people go is they start to look within. And they just ask themselves, who am I? And this is in that non-traditional culture, that sense of, well, if I could figure out who I am, if I could understand my identity, then I would just live into that and be my unique person in the world. And sometimes this is healthy because part of who you are when you go on a self-discovery is actually who God created you to be. And it's worth paying attention to what gifts did God give you? What strengths did God give you? Live into that identity. But in our world today, many people are just shaped by their desires. And the feeling becomes, if I feel a desire, then every desire inside of me must be legitimate, it must be healthy, it must be validated, it must be me. And one of the things the scriptures will warn you about is to say you will have competing desires in your life, some of which are healthy and some of which are not healthy, some of which are godly and some of which are not godly. And if your only journey inside yourself is to say, so how do I feel about that? What do I desire? I'm going to live that out. It's actually a very dangerous way to form your identity. So in contrast to looking around or looking within, there is the chance to look up to God. And think about this. When you look around, what you're gauging is the perception of others. It may or may not be accurate. It's a perception. When you look within yourself, what you're gauging is your perception of yourself. It may or may not be accurate. It's a perception of yourself. But if we were to pause and look up and say, God, who am I? This is not the perception of who God says you are. It's actually God who conceived you. He designed you. He created you. He made you to be who you are. Now, if you don't believe in God, I understand that you're not going to track with this, but if you believe in God at all, and you have any sense that God started this world, that potentially he even created you personally, then wouldn't one of the wisest moves we could make, it's just a smart move, right? To say, when I'm trying to figure out who I am, maybe I should ask, maybe I should seek the one who created me, who designed me, who I am. I want to read you some passages just to give you some thought processes before we go today. This is David in the book of Psalms. He says, God, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And I'd love for all of you to take a moment today and rewind your life all the way back to your mother's womb. I know you can't remember it, but I can tell you what was going on there. In your mother's womb, before you ever emerged into this world, God was knitting you uniquely together. And you, like David, are fearfully and wonderfully made. It's who you are. In the New Testament it says, for we are God's handiwork. Here's an identity. Those of you who were created in Christ Jesus, you were created to do good works. To say, you know what, this is a very broken world. It's not the way God wants it to be. I would be part of the solution to that world. That's not just meeting my own desires. That's not going on some journey of self-discovery. I actually have a mission. I have a purpose in this world to do good works, which actually God prepared in advance for me to do. So when you take this week and you pause a little bit and you think about your identity, one of the things I want to ask you to look for is, what are the places as you go through your week in life where you weren't aware of it before, but this week when you're aware, you'll say like, oh, maybe God placed that in front of me to do. So God is our creator. He's also our Father. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. Now think just for a moment with me. You, any of us with children, you do not, please tell me, you do not look at your children and you decide they're worth more or less based on what they accomplish. You don't do that with your own kids, right? I mean, there are a whole generation of children that will be in therapy as adults because the message they got from their parents was, you are nothing more than whatever you accomplish. You are nothing more than whether you got A's, whether you made the team, whether you succeeded, whether you graduated, whether you got into the college. If that's the message you're giving to your kids, you understand this, right? It's a horrible message. No parent, no father, no mother should put that kind of weight on their children that says, you are what you do. You are what you accomplish. No. In a relationship between a father and a child, the message is, you're valuable because of who you are. not because of what you do. And maybe the biggest hurdle for most people in this room to cross because of our cultural forces are for each of us to be reminded we are valuable. Our value is not in what we do, what we accomplish, how big the crowd was last weekend. That doesn't place our value. Our value is in who we are, that our Father loves us. In the book of Romans, it says they exchanged the truth about God for a lie. And they got things disordered. They worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. And this is the invitation as you step into this week. To say, when I'm sorting out who I am, what voices do I listen to? What things do I let cost me? What am I worshiping? Is it things that are created things, like things that are actually below me, they're worth less than me, rather than the Creator? And it's a reminder that God does not see us in the same light as other people do. This was actually from the selection of David to be the king of Israel. The scriptures say that the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at outward appearance. I get it. I get it. People will judge you based on how you look. Don't for a moment let that define your identity. Because God does not look at things that men look at. People look at the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. And your heart is the core of who you are. So here's the question for this week. Where am I wrestling? Between my perception, between people's perception of me, and God's conception of me. And I actually very particularly want to ask you to pause 3 times each day. First thing in the morning, last thing at night, and at some point in the middle of the day, to run through this question. Where was it over the last 3 hours? Where was it over the last day? Where is it as I'm looking forward to my day? That I'm aiming at what others think of me, or I'm trying to reconcile what I think of me versus what is who God says I am. So if you'll take that journey with me over the next 7 days, I'll come back and give you part 2 of my identity. Let's pray together. God, thanks for your goodness to us. Thanks for weaving us together in our mother's wombs. Thanks for making us who you wanted us to be. And help us to step into that. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Narrow as the road may seem, I'll follow where your spirit leads. Broken as my life may be, I will give you every piece. I hear you call. gave me life. Nothing is a sacrifice. Oh, use me how you want to, God. Have your throne within my heart. I hear you call. I am available. I say yes, Lord. I am available.
I hope that this has been a meaningful experience for you, even online. And I want you to know that every time that we get together, both online and in person, we include a time of communion. This is a moment for people who follow Jesus to look back on life and remember with gratitude all the amazing things that God has done, our need for God right now, and to look forward with hope, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. So now is the time to get some food and drink to represent Jesus' body and his blood that was broken and poured out for each and every one of us. And during that time, we're going to reflect together. If you don't follow Jesus, that's totally okay. I'm glad that you're checking out this video. Go ahead and use this time to reflect on what you've heard so far. And with that, let's focus on the love of Jesus together. Before you turn off this video, go ahead and hit the like, subscribe, and share button. And I want you to know that this video, this isn't the church, you are. So this week, I hope that you go and make a difference, that you go and be the church.